Hello, this is Rebecca Elder. I am a book and paper conservator and preservation consultant based in Austin, Texas. And today we're going to talk a little bit about mold prevention and remediation. Mold is a constant threat to library, museum, and archive collections. So if we know a little bit about it, we stand our best chance of protecting our collections from that kind of damage. So today we are going to talk about how to identify mold if you find it in your collections. We're going to talk about what makes mold happen. We're going to talk about health and safety because mold is a health hazard and your health is way more important than any collection. And we're also going to talk a little bit about remediation. So let's dive in. Mold is defined as a multicellular microscopic vegetable plant. Mold grows on surfaces in masses of branching threads which resemble dense cobwebs. These threads stand up from the surface and then release spores into the air. The spores are then carried by air currents, insects, and animals. Mold can be brilliant colors or black or white, and it all just depends on the type. As I said a few minutes ago, mold is indeed a huge risk to all kinds of collection materials, so it's worth looking at it in more depth. First, there are over 100,000 known species of mold and mildews are very similar to molds. The great variety of species means that patterns of mold growth and the response of mold to a particular situation can be unpredictable, and that's a really important point to remember. Nothing is going to act the same. Mold grows on any organic material. Molds excrete enzymes that allow them to digest organic materials such as paper, adhesives, cloth, leather, pretty much anything you can imagine, and it alters those materials and weakens them. I want to give a quick touch of attention to a very specialized form of mold, which is called foxing, just so that you know what it is. Foxing is a red-brown stain that occurs in paper, and the name, we believe, comes from the fact that it's the sort of reddish-brown color of a fox. It took a long time to understand, but now the consensus is that it's a form of mold that contaminated the papers during the paper-making process. It doesn't bloom actively like most molds, it just gently spreads through the paper over time. Because it doesn't bloom, it doesn't pose a threat to your collections, but you should know what it is so that you can identify it and so that you know that you don't have to be terrified of it when you find it. So now on to regular molds, the common things you're likely to see. This is the statistic that you should drill into your head. Mold grows when your relative humidity is greater than 65% for more than 72 hours, more or less. And mold will grow faster when the temperature is warm. So get that into your head because it's something that's useful both for diagnosing when you're likely to have mold problems and explaining to your facilities and administration staff why good control of your environment, your heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems is really important for preserving your collections. Because one of the things that's true and that we say a lot is that any mold problem is an environmental problem. Mold can also be a housekeeping issue. You're much more likely to have mold if you have dusty storage spaces that are rarely cleaned because mold spores are a large component of dust. So if you keep your storage spaces clean and dust-free, there's just less mold spores that can dig in. You're always going to have mold spores. It's a question of whether they're active and growing and doing damage or dormant and just sitting there and doing nothing. Which is a great lead into talking about active versus dormant mold. Mold will grow actively when your relative humidity is above 65% for 3 days or more, as we just said. Below 65% relative humidity, mold reverts to a dormant or inactive state. So this is really important, and it's important to know how to tell the difference because you can't do mold remediation from an active mold outbreak. You have to wait till you get to dormant again. So to tell which state mold is in, you just want to look at it under magnification. So a magnifying glass, a loop, something like that. You don't need a microscope. Active mold is going to look colorful and more dimensional and even squishy. And you all have seen, most likely, active mold, say for example, growing on a piece of cheese or a piece of bread in your refrigerator. Dormant mold looks different. It's dry and flat and powdery. And if you test the mold with a cotton swab, never put your finger on it. The active mold is going to smear while the dormant mold will just brush away. To make your active mold go dormant, you just need to reduce the humidity. If you get your relative humidity below 65%, shortly after that, the mold will go dormant and become dry and powdery, and you can work on your cleanup. But remember, if your relative humidity rises again, your mold will become active again. So if you have a mold outbreak, for the rest of your life, you're going to be managing your temperature and relative humidity. So this is just a quick slide to show you a comparison of what active versus dormant molds look like. Under magnification, active mold looks like fine filaments. The mold looks bushy, and you can see spores under magnification. The paper might feel a little damp. The mold is smeary, and if you have high relative humidity, you can expect that your mold is active. For dormant mold, the mold looks flat and your colors are dull. Paper will feel dry, the mold is powdery, and your relative humidity is under 65%. Mold is a health hazard as well as a collections hazard, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But for now, just know that if you have any doubt about whether or not your mold is active, assume that it is active because that's going to protect you and your collection. You don't want to be breathing, well, you don't want to be breathing any mold spores, but you definitely don't want to be messing around with active mold. And if you're cleaning, you don't want to smear active mold into the pages of your book and have it permanently embedded, for example. So let's talk about how we can minimize the potential for mold. You want to make sure you keep your temperature and relative humidity low. Usually we recommend relative humidity under 50% for preventing mold outbreaks because that gives you a little bit of a cushion before you hit that 65%. That's so important. And you want your temperature low. 68 is great. If you can go a little lower, that's even better. You want your air circulation to be adequate. Adequate air circulation helps control mold growth because it helps control moisture through evaporation. It also prevents mold from settling in one place in the form of dust. A good HVAC system, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, with humidity control offers the best protection, but that's really expensive and maybe beyond your reach. So you can also use fans. You can put fans near outside walls and close to the floor level. That'll keep your air moving around. Just make sure they're not blowing active mold into your environment. You can use portable dehumidifiers, and that's particularly useful for localized problems. Maybe you have one room that is consistently damp. That won't fix a poorly functioning HVAC system, but it will pull mold out of or water out of the air temporarily. You can also use fans and vents in attics, and that increases air circulation by just pulling air through the building. A few other things to think about. Don't shelve Don't put collection storage or shelving directly against an outside wall. Because of the differences in outside and inside temperature, you may get moisture developing inside the wall or along the wall. So if you leave a little space for air circulation, you'll enable an evaporation and minimize your mold possibilities there. You want to keep indoor plants to a minimum. Don't allow large planting areas. Don't put plants in collections areas. First of all, they will help raise the level of relative humidity a little bit, but also they get dusty, and even plastic plants get dusty, and that increases your chance of mold growth. Keep an eye out for signs of mold. Regularly inspect collections for signs because that will allow you to catch any infestations before they become large. And continue to monitor infested areas or areas that have been infested in the past because that is a barometer of the environmental conditions in your building. When people donate materials, chances are they have been stored in a garage or a basement or in an attic or in a barn, none of which are known for being mold-free environments. So check things for mold before you add them to the rest of the collection. Generally, what I recommend is at least a 72-hour quarantine period and then a very thorough inspection. And if you have any uncertainty about your environment or about a mold outbreak, consult with a conservator or an environmental consultant. So I promised you we would talk about mold as a health hazard, and here we go. Your health is more important than anything in your collections, and it should always be your first priority. So let's look at how you can protect your health. First, a few molds are toxic, so any outbreak, regardless of size, should be assessed by a mycologist to determine the mold species present. Talk to a local hospital for a referral. If you are somewhere where there is a university, they may have a biology department with somebody who studies mold. That would be another place to investigate. You should also know that only a few molds are toxic and they're rare in cultural heritage institutions, but it's not worth taking any chances. But aside from potential toxicity, there are other things to be aware of. Both active and dormant molds can have an adverse on people. So if you have allergies or asthma, you should stay away from mold because it will seriously irritate and inflame your lungs, and it can cause skin and eye irritations and infections. Prolonged exposure to germinating molds in closed areas, like collection storage rooms, can permanently damage your lungs, your mucous membranes, your cornea, your respiratory tract, your stomach, your intestines, and your skin. And I'm kind of the case in point here. When I first started in conservation, I wasn't very concerned with my health and didn't take care of my lungs around mold like I should have. And now, anytime I walk into a room with mold, I can tell almost immediately because my throat begins to close up and my voice becomes very froggy. And it's because somewhere along the way, I just developed a big allergy to mold. Your best safety precaution against any kind of damage to your lungs from mold is wearing a respirator. And here's a picture of me wearing my respirator and some hair protection. You always want to wear a properly fitted respirator when working with mold projects. As you can see from the picture, it is not glamorous, but it is also your best option for safety when dealing with mold. N95 masks that you can buy at hardware stores are another option, but because they are not fitted, they have the potential to be more harmful than good because they might, if you don't put them on correctly, allow unfiltered air in very near your nose. If you have a respirator, you should have it fitted annually by a professional. You can contact your respirator vendor for a recommendation or your nearest OSHA office for more information on that. You can also buy kits to do the testing yourself from industrial safety vendors like Granger, but you also need to understand all of the paperwork and OSHA regulations involved. When you're wearing a respirator, there are different kinds of filters, and the filters on the one in the picture is the kind of the purple cylinder. So you have different filters for different applications like particulates or solvent fumes, and it's important to make sure you have the right kind of filter for the right job, because a filter designed to filter out organic solvents will not protect against mold. So to check your fit on a respirator, you cover the intake valves on the filters at the sides with your hands, and then you inhale and you feel no air coming in. And on the other hand, you hold to check for exhalation. You hold your hand at the valve on your chin and exhale, and no air will escape. And you check that every time you put the respirator on to make sure it's functioning. There is other protective gear you should be wearing as well, and lots of this is just common sense to protect yourself as much as possible. So always wear nitrile gloves when handling moldy materials. Those provide your best protection against spores getting on your skin. Cover your hair with a shower cap. Wear clothing you can take off immediately and wash in hot water with bleach, so a mold day is not a day to wear your favorite outfit. If you are doing extensive mold work, consider getting Tyvek suits. They're not terribly expensive and will completely protect you from mold. Also consider wearing protective eyewear, safety glasses, and anything disposable should be thrown away at the end of the day. Just get rid of it. Don't let the mold hang around. Two more things to think about. First, avoid touching your face when you're working with mold, and people touch our faces more than we realize. I would bet there is a good chance that listening to this, you probably have a hand on your face. And it's very easy for mold spores to jump from your face to your eyes, to your nostrils, and to your mouth. And take frequent breaks. Breaks are important so you can give yourself a rest from the respirator, which is a pretty tiring thing to wear, and just get some fresh air circulating into your lungs. So now let's move on and talk about response and recovery, what you're going to do when you have a mold outbreak. This is a picture of some mold cleanup I did a couple years ago, and as you can imagine, it's pretty messy work. You want to do it carefully and correctly so that you help your collection and don't do further damage. So let's look at what you're going to do if you discover a mold outbreak. If you find a mold outbreak, the first thing you're going to do is immediately isolate the infected materials. Remove them to a clean area with low relative humidity, like below 45%. Keep everything separate from the rest of your collection so you don't have any cross-contamination. When you move things around, it's a good idea to move them in sealed plastic bags because that's going to avoid transferring mold to other items during the move. But once you get to your clean area, take them out of the bags since the bags will create a microenvironment that can foster faster mold growth. Next, you need to locate the source of the relative humidity and solve the problem. As long as you have a relative humidity problem, you have a mold problem. So look first for obvious sources of moisture, like water leaks and problems with your HVAC system. Reduce the humidity in the affected area, so turn on your air conditioning, add fans, add portable dehumidifiers. Don't increase your heat, because if you turn on your heater, that's going to cause the mold to grow faster. And it's worth saying as many times as I can, unless you solve your humidity problem, you will always have a mold problem. Next, if you have materials that are wet, think about freezing them. Because mold grows within 48 to 72 hours of exposure to water, freeze the affected material if you can't dry it within 48 hours. If the item is small enough, you can put it in the freezer compartment of a home freezer, wrap it in freezer paper, take out all of your food when you're doing this. Once you get things into a freezer, you can thaw them out and dry them at your leisure or arrange for other treatment. Freezing doesn't kill the mold, but it does stop further growth until you have a chance to marshal your resources to get things dry and clean. You will need to clean your space, and the photo here shows some mold on the ceiling of a library located inside a cave. Often caves are great places for storage. They have naturally low temperatures and relative humidity, but in this one the HVAC system wasn't properly monitored. So when it started allowing the humidity to rise, nobody noticed, and that led to an ongoing mold problem. So as far as cleaning goes, you cannot adequately clean HVAC systems and carpets by yourself. Those should be cleaned by professionals, and honestly, a mold outbreak may be the excuse that you need to get rid of your carpet and put in hard floors, which are much less likely to harbor mold and insects. You may be called upon to clean your shelving and walls. If you're going to be doing that, remember to wear your protective gear, especially your gloves and your respirators. If you're going to do that, use a solution of isopropyl alcohol and water, or bleach and water, or liquid Lysol and water. I prefer isopropyl alcohol because it's the least toxic, but you will use what you have available. So clean all your surfaces of your walls. Also clean all your surfaces of your shelves, so top, bottom, back corners. I should say that you should never use a liquid solution like this on collection material. This is for shelving and walls only. Once you have cleaned, make sure you allow your room to dry at least overnight to make sure things are completely dry, and continually monitor your temperature and relative humidity to make sure that your relative humidity is low and that your mold problem doesn't come back. Finally, let's talk about cleaning mold from collections. There are, and specifically I'm looking at paper today, although a lot of this transfers to artifacts as well. There are lots of ways to clean mold from paper, but all of them require you to be slow and cautious and methodical because it's very easy to do damage as you do the cleaning. I hope you're also knowing that the photograph you're seeing doesn't show the proper personal protective equipment. She is wearing a mask, but a respirator would be better, and also she should have her hair covered. So where are you going to do this cleanup? If you're going to work indoors, the ideal is a fume hood. The picture shows a fume hood. There's a fan in the hood that draws all of the air up and out of the building, and then you put your hands under the glass panel at the front and lower it as much as possible. And that's the safest way to work with dangerous substances inside a building. If you're lucky enough to have a fume hood, you should still wear your respirator even if you're working in the hood. You can also work outdoors with your protective gear on, and that will help keep mold spores outside of your work area and blow them around into the outdoors. The ultraviolet light from the sun may also be helpful in deactivating mold. But remember that light exposures should be short, and only do this for things that you would accept some yellowing in, because the sun may cause yellowing. When you're working, Work at a standing height table if you don't have chairs available. Leaning over a low table will be challenging. It'll give your back problems after a while. So one of the classic ways to clean mold is by vacuuming. And a good quality vacuum with a HEPA, high efficiency particulate filter, can be used for removing mold from objects. In effect, it acts as a mini fume hood. You can either place documents under a screen and vacuum through the screen at low suction if the documents are very sturdy, or you can use a soft brush and brush the mold up into the vacuum. Use very low suction and put a screen of cheese or put a piece of screen or cheesecloth or even the foot of an old pair of pantyhose over the end of the hose. And that's going to ensure that anything you vacuum up that's large, like maybe a chunk of a page, does not get vacuumed down into your vacuum. If you don't have a HEPA vac, you can also use a shop vac that has a little bit of water with alcohol or bleach or liquid Lysol in the tank and use a brush to move spores up into that. The water in the tank will capture and kill the mold spores. Another really classic way to clean mold is with a hake brush, which is the brush you're seeing on the screen. And this is the same kind of brush you would use to brush mold up into a vacuum. They're really soft. They're also very inexpensive, like $5 for one with half a dozen shafts of bamboo. So once they've been used to clean moldy materials, you should throw them away because they run the risk of contaminating your entire collection. If you're using a brush, always brush away from you so you're not brushing mold spores towards yourself, and start in the middle of the page and brush out, because if you start at the edge of the page, you run the risk of tearing fragile edges. Soot sponges are my favorite way to clean mold. It's what I use almost exclusively. They are natural latex sponges, and you use them dry and just cut them into little chunks. Then you gently dab, not scrub, but just dab at the paper, and they will pick up the mold and encapsulate it. They'll capture it. It's not going to be floating around the room. You use them until the surface is dirty and then just throw them away. There are some things that you should not be working on. And you should talk to a conservator because you can do some serious damage when you're doing cleanup. So anything that is soft or pilling, when paper gets moldy, it'll lose a lot of its structure, and anytime you touch it, you might wind up with some pilling on the surface of the paper. You don't want to get involved with that. You also don't want to be cleaning anything with friable media. That would include charcoals, pastels, pencil drawings, because that medium just sits on the surface of the paper, and if you start brushing, you could brush it away. You should have a conservator work on photographs, and you should also have a conservator work on material that has complex tears or losses. If you are doing a major mold cleanup and you're anticipating doing it yourself, it's a good idea to hire a conservator to come in and do some training to make sure that you and your staff are doing the cleanup correctly. One of the first things you should do if you discover a mold outbreak is call the National Heritage Responders. The NHR are a team of volunteer conservators and collections care professionals. They staff a 24-hour hotline, and if you have any kind of collections out emergencies, anything from a hurricane to a tornado to a fire to a mold outbreak, you can call up, and the conservator on the hotline will give you advice on how to deal with the problem or find someone who can talk to you and help you. And if the problem is more severe than can be handled on the telephone, There are also possibilities to deploy to visit you, and all of those services are free of charge. So put the phone number 202-661-8068 in your cell phone, in your disaster plan, and use it when you need it. So that's the end of my presentation. I am always happy to talk with people about things like this, so feel free to stay in touch. My email address is rebecca@elderpreservation.com, and you can read more about me and what I do at www.elderpreservation.com. Thank you so much. Have a good day.